It is that mentality that we've seen in the United States as well. And it's something that I've found really troubling. And you see it in the sort of study of both American and European history, this idea that when something truly terrible happens in the West, that it is unique to the West. But when something good happens to the West, then it is a world achievement. We saw this with regard to the moon landing, where people in the West were saying, well, that was a real achievement by humanity. But when it comes to things like slavery, well, that is unique to the West. That is, yes, it's a horrible sin that was committed by the West, also existed in every society for all of human time. And that isn't that isn't a justification for slavery in the West. It is to suggest that what makes the West different is the stuff that actually makes the West different. It is not the stuff that that is common to all humanity.
Yeah, the interesting thing was that we abolished slavery. I mean, plenty of places didn't bother to. Plenty of places still have it going on now. So yes, I think, by the way, Ben, you point, this particular issue points to a very important thing I think we all have to be able to think about, which is when people raise these things, are they raising them? When they say, look at your history of colonialism or look at your history of slavery, are they raising them as critics or as enemies? And I think this is one of the most important questions to address. It reminds me of something that Jean Kirkpatrick said around the time of Vietnam. She said, I didn't doubt that America had the opportunity to be better, but in order to be better, it had to survive. It had to continue. And you had then, as we have now, a certain cohort of people who don't want America to continue as it is, don't want Britain to continue as it is, don't want Europe to continue the way it is. And I hear that all the time, and I don't think it's called out often enough, that when somebody says, you know, you have nothing but the original sin, as I call it in The Strange Death of Europe, the original sin of settler colonialism or slavery or empire. And by the way, you can do that everywhere. Even countries in Europe like Sweden that had no empires are sort of, you know, like melded into the guilty empire post colonial guilt parade. And so when people do that and they say that's all you are, I just think we should turn around and say, that is such an unfair estimation of our societies. I mean, every country on earth I've ever been to has good things and bad things to be said about them. But when you only focus on the bad, you know, if you said that, I don't know, a country in like Greece or something, if you said Greece has never done anything, it's never produced anything, it just robs people or something, people say, that's just an unfair. It seems like a weird critique. What have you got against the Greeks? We'd know that was what was going on because this wouldn't be a fair estimation of the country, as it would be if you talked about any country in Africa, the Far East, the Middle East, or anywhere else. And that's what we've been dealing with. We've been dealing with in all of our countries in recent years, enemies, people who hate our societies, don't want them to continue as they are in any recognizable form, want to completely transform them, but would like us to pretend that they are merely critics who just want a couple of tweaks and mildly change us. And that's just not the case. It's so wildly unfair, the way in which a couple of generations now have been lied to about what our societies are.
Well, this goes to the thematics of some of the stuff you talk about in your newest book, The Madness of Crowds, because as we've dissolved some of the larger kind of societal forces that bind us, as we've dissolved religion, as we've dissolved nationalism, tribalism has sprung up in its most basic forms. We've seen people reverting to almost more basic forms, smaller group forms of identity in opposition to into that larger blank space that you've been talking about. And you talk about this in terms of what we see online, the social media mobbing, the search for identity in finding people that we can gang together and attack, the search for identity in race, in gender, and how that really is tearing us apart.
Yes, I mean, after doing The Strange Death of Europe and writing about immigration, Islam, and multiculturalism, I thought, what are the remaining landmine issues that I can like merrily dance over and jump on? And I thought I know, and in fact I quite like occasionally, and I was speaking at Oxford University a little while ago, and as a very smart young student interviewing me and about the madness of crowds, and he said, I just like, for the audience to get an idea of what I just like to read out the title page of Douglas's new book, and he read out. He said, you know, gay, women, race, trans. And he looked out at the audience and I looked out at them and they all just had their eyes open and then we all burst out laughing because you could see they were just like, no, every single one of them. And I can't deny that I sort of enjoy seeing these sort of, ridiculously over complicated issues that people are terrified about. I can't deny that I quite enjoy, being the person, one of the people who says, the emperor's got no clothes, or in this case, also the emperor's a total fraud and idiot. So I decided to do them all one by one, and loved doing so. I also, by the way, I just have a great time on this because it's just, a lot of it is like shooting fish in a barrel, because you're dealing with. I thought, by the way, I should stress that. When I started looking deeply into the whole issues of intersectionality and all that sort of thing, I did what I always do, which is I go back to the fundamental texts, the foundational literature. What are the philosophical bases for this? What's the stuff we contend with first? And I have to say, I thought with this that, the identity politics movement, which is not just racing through all of our societies, but racing through business in all of our societies. It's not just government that's absorbed this stuff. It's Fortune 500 companies who've all got diversity outreach, officers and HR departments, which are the only thriving part of the business. And so I thought, well, at least if we've done this, if we've rolled this out everywhere, there must be some serious thought behind it. And I was just flabbergasted by how little of it there was. It is small, insignificant texts from the 1970s onwards, mainly from American universities, it has to be said, who just assert things. They don't even prove anything. They just assert things. The foundational text, one of them of intersectionality, is Unpacking the Knapsack, is just a couple of pages of assertions, which are all wrong, by the way, provably so. And now you've got, now several decades of people who've gone to universities, particularly in America, and become totally unemployable, or at least completely useless to society at large, by studying these things as if they exist, as if they're real, as if they've been agreed upon. And so, by taking them one by one of the things I wanted to do was to help deprogram particularly young Americans and young Europeans who had been violently, badly programmed, who had been told that their society is something which their society isn't, and had been told that the way out is something which is catastrophically, obviously not a way out. Find meaning in womanhood. Wow. Deep. Find meaning in being gay. Make it your entire life, only listen to gay music and read gay texts and wear gay clothes. This is pathetic. And it's the same, I think, on the race issue. These unbelievable race baiters who pretend they're anti-racist, who pretend that people can find meaning in their life because of their skin pigmentation. It's grotesque, and I wanted to push back against it, and to say to people, particularly to young people, don't waste any more of your life than you have to on this crap. Find meaning in your life, definitely, but don't think you're going to get it from your chromosomes.
It seems as though one of the fundamental underlying bases is an unarticulated assumption. And that unarticulated assumption, because if you actually articulated it, it would be obvious what a problem it is that all inequalities are inequities. And that, therefore, if you're a member of a group that has had some sort of unequal outcome, then that must be the result of an inequitable system, that the system itself is corrupt. And so what you end up seeing is a lot of these sort of group identities directed at precisely the sorts of free institutions that we normally enjoy and like. So the idea is that a right, because the right is distributed equally, is actually inequitable because not everybody can take equal advantage of the right. So if you have free market economics where everybody has control over the alienation of their own labor and resources, well, that's actually unequal and unfair because some people have more resources than others. Some people have more intellectual capital than others. The idea is that in the end, what you're shooting for is a sort of utopian leveling. And if any group and all groups will be unequal. It doesn't matter how you staff a room. You can distribute a room any way you want. If you draw a line down the middle of it, there will be inequalities between the two sides of the room. But the idea here is that if if those inequalities exist, that is a problem with the system, which leads to this sort of perennial revolutionary idea, because of course you're never going to reach utopia.
Well, quite. I mean, the first thing is the importance of avoiding utopian thinking in general. You know, the people, as a late friend of mine who was an expert in this once said, the people who you can see from the stare in their eyes as they're coming towards you with an idea of how you should live your life, and that they know better than you how you should run a million bloody miles from these people. Always. And that's the first thing. The second thing is, I do think there is a fundamental issue which doesn't get opened up enough, which you just did, which is this, a very instinctive one, long before the level of analysis, is that the sort of world you want to live in? I mean, you know, I think the late Irving Kristol, who I enormously admired, said somewhere years ago in a quote that would have got him cancelled today. He said somewhere, I'm not for equality. He said, I'm not for it in the arts. I'm not for it in sports. I'm just not for it in this world. And I think there's something in this that has to be identified, because we've been through iterations of this before. Do you want a society? Do you want a society where everybody turns out the same, or are you content with a considerable degree of variation in all sorts of things? I mean, we accept the example I was giving. We accept the fact that height changes a lot, and that it actually has quite an important impact on your life. For some people, there are certain, you know, I could never have been a basketball player, even if I'd wanted to. I don't think you could have been either, probably, Ben. And,
nope.
And I'm sure we've both nursed our wounds for years on this, and we've probably come to an acceptance by now. But, you know, that was something that was a born thing. There's nothing either of us could have done about that. There's a lot of other factors that we have no say over. Very attractive people are disproportionately likely to be successful in their lives. What do we do about this? We don't know any more than we do with height. So the weird thing is that we've selected a few things to become obsessive about in the equality stakes. But there's this foundational question, which many people went through in the early parts of the 20th century as well. One of the things I've often been interested in is why some people had a visceral reaction against communism. A visceral reaction, long before any organized movements were against it. Why did some people just not want it? And broadly speaking, the thing I've often found in people's testimonies from the time is that there was an instinctive revulsion from a certain type of person who liked the complexity and oddity and variety of the world. Now, this is, by the way, this is a sort of difficult thing, because, of course, people say, well, it's all very well if you're at the top of the tree to enjoy the variety, but I'm not really saying that. What I'm trying to say is that we probably have to, in order to lead contented or happy lives, reconcile ourselves with certain things in the world. And just as one reconciles oneself to the fact that one will never be a basketball player, so one has to reconcile oneself to other things that one can't be and do. And the problem is there's one thing built into this, which is the discussion we should be having, which we don't have because everyone's got us stuck on the equality one. And the discussion we should be having, because I think we could get agreement on right and left on this, is the world I think probably could agree on that we want is one in which nobody is held back from achieving things because of a characteristic they have no say over, if they have the competency to achieve it. And I reckon across the left and the right, we could agree on that. You know, who doesn't agree with the idea that if somebody wants to be a physicist and they happen to be, I don't know, a woman or from an ethnic minority or something, that they shouldn't be able to be a physicist? Who wants to keep women out of physics or black people or minorities out of physics? I mean, almost nobody. I mean, there'll be a few nutters in America and a few in Europe, but they have no meaningful voice, those people. The rest of us are trying to contend with a really complex question. And we have a variety of answers, and it sometimes compete with each other. But broadly speaking, that is a different thing from trying to make society come out completely equal or equitable, as you quite rightly make the difference. And I just wish that we actually had that conversation of, how can we make sure that we are societies with the best possible ladders system